Oh, cool. So effects chains. Effects chains are multiple effects together. So for example, if we look at my screen here, these are not effects chains. This is just one effect on a track. It's not a chain of effects. Over here on the right, these are effects chains. Okay, so this is an effect chain, this is an effect chain. But like this deverb here, this micro shift, this BF76 compressor, these are not effects chains. But this one here, so this here is a EQ1 band, and then it's a de-esser, and then it's a BF76. These are effects chains, and these are probably just basing on what these effects are. I'm going to go ahead and say these are vocal effects. And if I look down here, yeah, so this is a vocal track. So these are effects chains, and these are not effects chains, right? So that's what an effects chain is. In an effect chain, the sound of each individual effect changes the signal, then outputs the affected signal, then the next effect changes that signal, and so on. So for example, I have my dry signal right here, and then it goes into effects 1, and then that signal gets changed, and then it goes into effects 2, and that signal gets changed, and then it goes into effects 3, and that signal is what we hear. So the signal, it's not like the dry signal starts here, and then effect 1 is changing the dry signal, and then effect 2 is also changing the dry signal, and then effect 3 is also changing the dry signal. That's not what's happening. What's happening is the dry signal starts, and then effect 1 is changing the dry signal. But then effect 2 is changing the sound that comes out of effect 1. And then effect 3 is changing the sound that comes out of effect 2. Okay, that's how this works. And what I recommend is you experiment, try different orders, change it up. So let's just listen to this vocal part real quick here. And Flexo Glizzo says, I can change my group up. Let's talk. So, because we're 3 weeks in, and we're getting to a point where it's like, really? You're still trying to change your group? But let's talk. But not right now. All right, so here's my vocal part. Let's just listen to this.
Just another night.
This song here.
Until I saw you there. You were so complex, I had to study every layer.
Okay. Cool. So I got this stuff here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna loop that like that. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go here. I'm gonna open it up so we can see. Whoops. I'm gonna open it up so I can see my instruments, my effects and stuff over on the right-hand side here. So we can see over here on the left. Here is my inserts. And let's go ahead and do this. Let me go ahead and put in something we can hear quite a bit. Here, let's go ahead. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn these off for now.
Just another night until I saw you there. She was so complex.
Okay, and you can hear it sounds pretty good because the recording was well done. So if I turn this on here, this one band, we're not going to hear a huge difference.
Just another night.
Right, we're not hearing a huge difference. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put in here a, let's see, what do I have here so I can see it? All right, so what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and use my Fab Filter. The reason I'm using Fab Filter is not to change it with Fab Filter. I just want to see the waveform.
Just another.
Right, so there's with my.
Just another night.
You can see there's some low frequencies here.
Till I saw you there.
Right over here on the left. And if I turn on my one band EQ,
just another night.
You can see how those are gone.
Until I saw you there. She was so complex, I had to study every layer. Just another night.
Right. Now if I turn on my de-esser, we're not going to really see any big difference here with the de-esser. and we're not going to hear it. We might hear it, but it's going to be harder to see.
Just another night until I saw you there.
So what we're listening for with the de-esser is the sound, the S, the sibilant sound here. And you can see it's actually compressing quite a bit on some of these words. So he's saying, just another night till I saw you there. Like that saw part there, we should be able to hear it there. So let's listen for it and we can watch it happen as well. So here it is without the de-esser.
Just another night until I saw you there.
Hear how crispy that is. Let's turn it on.
Just another night until I saw you there.
And you hear how that kind of brings it down in volume so it's not quite as loud. That's what the de-esser is doing. Now let's go over here and grab this, the BF76. And again, we're not going to see very much change with this in our Pro Q3, just because this is not a frequency thing. But I'm just going to keep it open here. And let's do this. Let's bypass it. Listen to it real quick one more time.
Just another night until I saw you there.
Okay, let's turn it on.
Just another night until I saw you there. Yeah, she was so complex, I had to study every layer. Okay,
so you can hear it's louder because the output gain on this compressor is higher. But then you can also see it's compressing things. It's hitting about -3 dB here. So it's definitely evening things out. So let's see here. Landon says, do you ever prefer a more manual EQ to a de-esser? Well, they're very different. So usually I do have a manual EQ. I found that this vocal, I don't really hate the sound of this vocal. I just wanted to get rid of some of the sibilances. And a de-esser, what it does is it's specifically for the S sounds. And then what you can do after you add a de-esser in is you can actually bring up those frequencies again later, and it doesn't add everything back in the way you think it would. It kind of adds in this kind of air sound to it. So the answer is usually I use both. I use a manual EQ and I use a de-esser. The de-esser always goes very early on. I usually put it right after my one-band EQ, which we're going to talk about in today's notes a little bit more. I've got like my signal chain for vocals. So in here, now if I go in here and I say, okay, let's see what happens. Let me go ahead and put in more of these here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move my one-band EQ to be after my BF76. So now it's the de-esser. Let's put the de-esser after the compressor as well. So now it's hitting the compressor first, and then I'll turn this off. Yeah, I'm just going to turn this one off so we're not hearing it at all. And then it hits the one-band EQ and then the de-esser. So I can just do this here. Let me just put this here so you can see it easier. Okay, so now let's listen to that and see if we can hear a difference.
Just another night until I saw you there.
Okay, that's going to be really hard to hear, but we can see, if you see what's happening, it's actually compressing it more now than it was just a second ago. So here, let me put it after the one-band EQ and the de-esser, and watch this compressor here real quick.
Just another night until I saw you there.
Now it's actually hitting it about the same.
Just another night.
A little bit more.
Until I saw you there.
But not enough that you're really going to hear it. With these kinds of effects, it's a little bit harder to hear things. But it does change what's happening with the sound. A little bit easier to hear this would actually be on the drums. So let's go ahead and listen to the drums, because I want y'all to hear this. And I want you to hear it in a way that's like, wow, that's a big difference. So I'm going to go down here. Let's go ahead and... Did I group my drums together? I did not. So I'm going to put all my drums together here. Drums, change my group ID to D here for drums. There you go.
Just another night.
Okay, so there's that. So my drums as a whole, let's see. Let's use, maybe the bass is better. You know what? Actually, let me just change this entirely here for a second. Hold on a second. Because these instruments, well, yeah, we can do it with the drums. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just keep this compressor there. I'm going to turn it off for a second, and we're going to use, let's go ahead and I'm going to put a distortion in here because distortions are usually easy to hear things. And one of my favorites for this is the Bermuda Triangle. I'm going to turn this down here. Okay, so you can hear that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an EQ cut before it and after it. We're going to just change that around here and listen to the sound. So I'm going to put this down to, let's say 500 hertz. Okay, so listen to that sound there, and now listen to this sound here. I'm going to move it afterwards. And let's put it before it one more time. And can you hear the difference in that? Here, let's put it up. Let me know if you can hear that difference there. So this one here, yeah, let's listen to it again. Let's listen to this one. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to hear the change here. Let's move this so it's going to the right place here. And this is, I'm kind of wondering if this might be a matter of like getting your ears acclimated to this stuff. So what I'm hearing, hold on, let's listen to this like this. There we go. Like that, and then this here. There, yeah. Can you hear that change? Let's hear it one more time. So this is with the EQ before the distortion. And also having headphones on will probably help. If you're listening through your speakers on your, whatever you're listening to it on, if you're listening like on an iPad or something like that, or on your Mac speakers, it's gonna be harder to hear all these changes. The headphones are definitely gonna help this. So that's with the EQ before, and here's with the EQ after. With the EQ after it, after the distortion, you can hear the kick drum is a little bit more thumpier, thump, 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 thump. And with the EQ before the distortion, everything is kind of distorted out a little bit more evenly, and you don't hear that thump of the kick drum. So this one here is a little bit more evenly distorted, and then if I put my EQ after the distortion, you hear the kick drum kind of coming through a little bit more in the overall distortion. And there's a reason for that, and the reason is because if I have my compression, if I have my, let's say my compressor is here in this green one, and if I put an EQ here, what's going to happen is, or sorry, not my compression, my distortion. My distortion is here in this green one. And what happens is, if I suck out the low frequencies, the distortion is not acting on those low frequencies. It's not acting on the full harmonic, the full spectrum of the harmonics. But if I put my EQ over here after my distortion, what happens is the distortion is distorting all the frequencies, including those low frequencies. But then we're taking out the low frequencies after the distortion has already distorted the low frequencies. So in this one here, the low frequencies are never making it into the distortion. So the distortion is reacting only to the mid and high frequencies. Whereas if I put it here in the effect 3 slot, what's happening is the distortion, the low frequencies are being distorted with everything, which is a very hard distortion. And then we're taking out the low frequencies, so we're hearing it differently. Okay, so so that's what's happening there. And my advice is, which I've written right here, my advice is experiment and change it up. Try different orders, because as Maria was saying, is you don't really hear a change, and we did hear a change, and it had to do with how I was sending it out. But some of these changes are subtle and hard to hear, and the only way you're going to really get so you can hear them is kind of overdoing things and trying things out and just like doing a lot of experimentation. And this is something you've heard me say before, I'm going to say it again, is you have to experiment with this stuff. In order to become a better producer, the best thing you can do is to experiment and try new things. Sometimes people say to me, Tony, what happens if I do this? Blah, 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 whatever. And I'll say, try it and tell me what happened. Not because I don't want to tell you things, but because you need to experience it for yourself. Because for me, trying to describe music, trying to describe sound is really difficult sometimes, or impossible. You just have to hear it for yourself. And this is certainly one of those cases where the order matters. You have to know that it matters, and you have to experiment with things to try stuff out. Okay, so a couple things here: serial versus parallel chains. And we're getting into a couple of more advanced techniques here, and we're going to definitely talk about them more and more as we go through the classes. But one of the things that that people talk about is parallel compression for drums. It's also called New York compression. And Jelani says always undo. Yeah, it's good when you can undo stuff. If you experiment and you try stuff out and you're like, I don't like this, go back it up to where you did like it. Absolutely, yep. So what we're getting into here is talking a little bit about things like parallel compression and stuff like that, and not just not hardware someone might blow aboard. Well, if you are experimenting with hardware, who is that? It's Andre. Andre says, just not hardware someone might blow aboard. You can still experiment, but just understand what you're doing when you experiment. I like to do a lot of feedback stuff, especially back when I had a board. I don't have a hardware board anymore, but when I did have a hardware board, I used to do a lot of experimenting with feedback loops and stuff like that. And feedback loops are cool, but they can easily get out of control and destroy everything. So when you're experimenting with stuff like that, and this is something that you just have to learn, even when you're doing like using like Guitar Rig or something like that to affect your sounds, you have to know how it works. And some sounds are in like Guitar Rig are super loud, and some are not so loud. And what you want to do for Guitar Rig is put a limiter after Guitar Rig to make sure the really loud ones don't crush things. Same thing when you're doing experimentation with when you're doing something. Well, it's a joke, I get it, but it's true, because if you don't know when you could break things, then you might accidentally break things. And so whenever you're not sure about what you're doing when you're experimenting with stuff, always make sure you turn down your output level. Turn down your level to your speakers, so that way even if it gets super loud or your feedback gets out of control, you're not going to break stuff. And it's not to say don't do it, but just be safe when you are doing it. Cool. So serial versus parallel here. Serial is when you have a row of effects, one right after the other, and parallel is when you have two rows of effects that are independent. They don't affect each other. And so this is what we've got going on here. This one here is the dry signal goes into the effect, goes into the next effect, goes into the next effect, and it goes to your speakers. Down here with my parallel, is you have two rows that are independent from each other and they don't really affect each other. So A and B are two different effects chains. And A, in this case, A has effects in it, but you could make A just be the dry signal and B, your effect chain, be the effects. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish here. But you can see A and B, effects 1A, effects 2A, effects 3A. And then B is over here, effects 1B, effects 2B, effects 3B. These would have independent effects that are different from each other and they change the sound, and what happens is you mix the sound back together here at the end. So let's just see how that would work. And here we've got our drums. I'm going to take this distortion off our drums. All right, so let's say that what I want to do is I want to take these drums and I want to put some, I want to compress the crap out of them. So let's do that. So let's go ahead and compress the crap out of these drums. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to put some kind of crazy compression on them. I'm going to my dynamics and go here to, let's just use the compressor limiter that comes with Pro Tools. And let's compress them a lot. And you hear this crazy sound we're making. Okay, if I turn this off, here's what they sounded like before. And here's what they sound like now. They're both about the same volume level. They're the same level and volume because I've turned my gain up on my compression here. But, so if I go back and forth, but you hear how different they sound. They sound completely different. And what if I wanted to combine those two sounds together? So what I can do here is if I want like the natural kind of sound of my natural drums, but I want to have a little bit like this more kind of sustained sound as well. Well, what I can do is I can take these two drums and I can do this parallel compression, parallel thing. So we're going to go here and let's make another track. I'm going to make an aux channel here, stereo aux channel, because we're using stereo drums. And I want to put the compression on my stereo drums here. And this is in, here's what we're doing right here. So this parallel chain, it's in the notes, it's right here. So we've got our drums here and then we've got our compression. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send these drums over here to these here. So I'm going to take the signal from my drums, my drum group, and I'm going to send the signal over here to my drum compressor. So I'm going to call this one here drum comp. I'm going to go send here. I'm going to go to the track, drum comp. There we go. So it makes that bus for me. And I'm going to use this pre so I can adjust the level independently of whatever this level is here. So I got this. So now if I turn this down, right? If I turn that down, all we're hearing right now is this compressed signal. And if I turn this one down and put this one back up, there's our natural signal. So if I want to combine those two, and give some sustain to those. Right? And these sound like, they don't sound good at all by themselves, but if we use them to kind of fill in, there's that. If we want to fill that in, just pull them up like this. We can use them to fill in. Now, what I would do at this case here is I would actually group these again. Here, I would send both of these to its own little aux channel. And send this over to the instruments. So now what this does is it gives me control of my drums overall. Right, and you can see we get this new sound from having these drums be parallel compressed like this. And if you want to change the sound over here even more, so here's just my original sound, or sorry, my compressed sound. And let's put an EQ in the front of this and hear what that sounds like. Put it there. Let's hear what it sounds like afterwards and see if it changes the sound. Yeah, it totally changes that sound. Hear that? You can't really hear those hi-hats very much. So this one here, you hear the snare and the hi-hat a lot more. And this one, you don't hear the snare and the hi-hat much. And the reason why is because you've got all those low frequencies that are compressing the sound. And when those compress the sound, it's also turning down the hi-hats and the snare drum. Whereas here, if I put it before it, we're taking out those low frequencies. So it's letting the snare and the hi-hat basically just compress themselves. So now, and it really depends on what kind of sound you're going for. There's this sound here. Or that sound there, and they're very different sounds, and they're both fine, but they're different sounds depending on what you're going for. And that's how you would create that sound in general, that kind of compressed parallel sound. So you're still getting the natural sound of the drums, but you're getting this filler that's in there as well, which is pretty cool. And it's okay, like, to have these drums sound so bad by themselves. Like, there's nothing wrong with that because you're never going to hear this. You're never going to hear this one by itself. It's just not something that's going to happen unless you release the stems. All right. So that's the parallel thing. And the serial thing we've already talked about. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the sends for your send effects, for your reverbs and stuff like that, always happen after your effects. The sends are always after the effects. It doesn't matter if they are set for pre or post fader. Therefore, the sound going to the send is the affected sound. So you've got your effects, the EQ, compression, another EQ, tape, whatever. The send is always after those effects. even if you're set for pre-fader or post-fader, both of those happen after the effects chain. And this is what we were just talking about here, the parallel drums compression. The compressed signal provides the smack and punch, or in this case we have it set, because this compressor that we're using here isn't so good for that. It's more good for this kind of like, I don't know, it's like this like extended sound, like a sustained sound. The dry sound provides the body and low end, and then mix them together. Okay. So, and different compressors sound different. So, for example, if I wanted to, here, let's put a different compressor in here. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to open up my next group of inserts, and I'm going to go ahead and take this compressor and just put it down here. And let's put a different kind of compressor in here, just to hear some different compressors. So here's an SSL bus compressor from UAD, and I'm just gonna let's do this. Let's yeah, there we go. I can push it in using this. Set the attack, the release. Hear how that's like cranking, it's giving a little pop on the beginning. Right, so you got that sound there. You can hear that sound. Right, so that's a different kind of compressor there. And let's go ahead and show you a different compressor as well. And I'm over compressing these intentionally so you can hear these and what they do. There's like, I mean, there's so many different types of compressors out here. Let's use an SSL channel strip. And when we actually get back into school, you'll have access to the SSL channel strip and the SSL bus compressor, because we have an SSL there at SAE. In here, let's go in here and say, there's some different presets in here which are pretty good. Wide drum bus. I mean, a lot of these are going to have the EQs and stuff in them. I'm going to turn the EQ off. So here's our natural sound here. Let's over compress these. So you can hear this, how crazy compressed this is. It's like a really thick compression sound. All right, so there's a totally different sound of a compressor. It doesn't have the same kind of qualities that even the other SSL compression had. And then Charles says, if we never come back for the rest of the semester, can I enroll for studio equipment training? Well, so there's a lot of options. If we're gonna get back, probably. I don't know. Let's not even talk about it really. I mean, somebody's saying, yeah, Maria's saying don't jinx it, and I agree. But the answer is, to answer your question and give you a real answer, the answer is there are a lot of options for you to get in there and get the equipment training. Don't worry, you're not gonna not get equipment training. To answer your question, we got you. Let's go down here. Let's go to one of the cool things about using plugins is you have access to compressors that cost tens of thousands of dollars. So this Fairchild here, for example, Fairchild Compressor, these things cost like what, like 30,000, 50,000, some kind of crazy amount. They don't even, I mean, you can't even really get a vintage one really. I mean, you can maybe go to a studio that's got them. There are companies that make them. They're quite expensive, but and this is going to be quite hard to hear what it's doing to stuff because it's not a subtle sound, but if you're not used to listening to compressors, it's a very smooth sound with the Fairchild. Oh, what's up, Stanley? How you doing? Cool. All right. So, we're just going through and listening to some various compressors and stuff we've been talking about, signal chains and things like that. LA2A. This is another one that's like really nice and smooth. And you can switch this between compression and limiting. And it's just nice because it's like, it's just dealing with stuff really in a very musical, it sounds really nice, it's very smooth type of way. Let's see here, what else? What is this one? OTT. Oh, X for, this one's gonna be crazy. Hold on, let me just turn this down. Yeah, OTT, over the top, right? Whoops. You can get some cool sounds out of it. Some really neat stuff. I think this one's a free one actually. And it's a multi-band compressor. Yeah, this is a pretty neat one. It's very similar. So you're saying it looks like the OTT in Ableton. Actually, the one you're talking about is called the Multi-Band Dynamics Compressor in Ableton Live. They have a preset called OTT over the top. But yeah, it's very similar. They're both multi-band compressors. So that's why they look similar here. And this one here, you can drag these and move these around here. Yep. Yeah. You're not wrong. It's just that's why it's called OTT. But yeah, this is like I'm a big fan of multi-band compressors, and actually this one sounds pretty good. I really love the one in Ableton Live, that multi-band dynamics. It's got a rough sound to it, which I actually quite like. So anyway, so this is just some different compressors and stuff that that you can mess around with, and this is why there's so many different types of compressors out there, and you want to pay attention to what people say in articles, what your teachers say about stuff, because some compressors are good for vocals, some compressors are good for drums, some compressors are good for basses, some compressors are good for being very transparent so you can't hear the compression, and others are being like over the top, ha ha ha, and you can absolutely hear nothing but the compression, but that's okay because that's the sound you're going for. And you need to experiment with this stuff, as I've said before, so. Okay. So this is talking about using some other things here, different parallel chains, and this is yet a different chain here. This is it says the parallel chain on the previous page gives you an example of a setup you can use to mix two wet signals together while hearing none of the dry signals. So you must keep the dry signal on the original track because otherwise you'll be sending an affected sound into the effects chain, which would make it a serial chain. So for example, if you wanted to have two different signals where one is wet and one is dry, you could actually, one is wet and one is a different type of wetness. You could actually do it here, kind of, but the problem is, remember, according to this one here, this slide here, it says the sends always affect after the effects, right? So if you wanted to have two different types of effects and then mix them together, you couldn't do it on here because if we put the effects right on here, we'd be hearing the effect and then we'd have that effect would be going to a different effect. If we want to have two distinctly different effects, for example, in this case here, let's just try this. Let's go ahead, let's make a new track, aux, and we're going to call this one drum comp 1, and then we're going to call this one drum distortion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send this over here to this one and the other one to the other one. So this one's going to be going to my drums distortion. And let's do it like this. I'm gonna put that OTT on for the drums distortion. I'm gonna put a distortion after it. And on this track here, let's use the G bus compressor. Cool. The G bus compressor, and then let's do this and this over the top. I'm going to put the Bermuda thing on after it. So let's listen to our distorted sound first. Oh, there we go. There we go. And I'm going to mess with the sound here. Cool. Okay, so we got that sound going there. Okay, so we got that sound for that track. And now let's mix that with another sound. This one here. Cool, so we have that sound there, and this one, let's pull this one up into it. Let's. Cool, that's an interesting sound there. There we go. Cool. And now you can bounce between these. And if you wanted to, you can pull the dry sound back in and mess with these. To balance these. And you got like a three-way parallel effect going on there. And that's like how to do that is described here. But again, you gotta keep practicing and doing stuff with it to make it kind of make some kind of sense, or to get used to different ones and to make it make sense in your own head. All right, so in the notes, if you download the notes and stuff, there is this kind of crazy drum thing going on that I've got here happening from an old set, which it's on a computer somewhere. I don't think I have that set here anymore. But yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a break here. Let's take a 15-minute break. And after the break, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the vocal effect chain. And then we're also going to talk about delays and reverbs and how all those fit into everything. Cool. All right. Charles, I'm glad you like it. Yes. Cool. All right. So I'll see you on the flip of this break.